Bronxnet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. In February on Pelham Parkway, a young man suspected of fare beating was detained by police and arrested violently despite the fact that he claimed to have proof of his fare. 11 days ago, a Staten Island man suspected of selling untaxed loose cigarettes was choked to death by police who were in the process of arresting him. Just the other day, in the process of a marijuana arrest, a man was wrestled to the ground, and a bystander video appears to show that he was kicked in the head by a police officer while he was on the ground. These incidents and others have outraged many who had hailed the de-emphasis of stop, question, and frisk, but now wonder if there are even bigger issues with the NYPD and the relationships with people in New York communities. Tonight we'll look at some of the videos and talk NYPD with two Monroe College criminal justice professors, one a former police sergeant and the other a longtime professor and analyst of community policing and police tactics. Later in the show, we'll also hear from a Bronx council member on possible legislative initiatives. If you want to have your say about policing in the city of New York, then please call in at 718-960-7241. You can also email questions or comments to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of the program. But for the here and now, former NYPD sergeant and now professor of criminal justice at Monroe College, welcome back, Professor Augustine Aloya. Thanks, you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. And a former provost of John Jay College and now executive director of the Monroe College King Graduate School Research Institute, Dr. Basil Wilson. Sir, good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, guys.
Dr. Wilson, let's start with you. Why are we in this situation? One would think that at this point in the history of this city and the long, wonderful legacy of the NYPD, we wouldn't have these kinds of what appear to be rather rudimentary discussions about basic police tactics.
I think urban policing is difficult. I think a police officer is constantly making decisions. He's constantly using his judgment. There's a tremendous amount of discretion that a police officer has to make. So when you look at a 35,000 member police force like NYPD, there are definitely police officers who are not as sophisticated, are not as well trained as they should be. So you get these excesses. I mean, you know, all the studies that I've seen is that education is terribly important for police officers exercising the proper judgment. Mm-hmm. And I think what we've seen here in these three cases, and especially in the case in Staten Island, is a sort of reckless disregard for human life.
Mm-hmm. Professor Aloya, for you who have been on the streets, have been in this situation, do you get frustrated when you see people judged from the outside, and we're going to watch videos, and certainly they're unpleasant to look at in every way, shape, or form? Are there things that the general public doesn't know about what it's like to be, in that situation with really the potential of anything? I mean, we saw a terrible story in Greenwich Village this afternoon that, some man who was wanted shot some U.S. Marshals and a police officer.
Right.
So give me your perspective when you see these videos.
Well, you have to take these videos on many different angles, which, I presume I'll get to during the show. From a police officer, we do a lot of things procedurally that the public simply doesn't understand. Before the show started, gentlemen, we're looking at the videotape, and you were analyzing it a certain way. Well, part of it will be devil's advocate. I will also show you why and these things are done, why apparently you have a gang-up situation on a suspect. A lot of it's tactics, a lot of it's for safety. So especially with the Eric Garner case, I'm going to show you a bunch of angles, how to look at these things on. Some of it will be forensic, some of it will be from a civil aspect, criminal aspect, as well as police procedurally also.
Do you agree with Dr. Wilson that there is some issue with training and that, we probably need to do more? You've got a large police force of 35,000 members, and every one of them may not use the best and the smartest tactics when they're out there, and everything's on the line. We make no bones about the fact that it is a very dangerous job.
Well, the thing of training, Gary, it's not a perfect solution. We don't live in a perfect environment. After 9/11, nobody had ever trained or expected two commercial airlines to hit two buildings in New York City. So now, we prepare and, we move forward with that. With policing, you have the human element involved. Certain things with the way things are written in our patrol guide, I have issues with. There are some cases where they use never, always, as a last resort. We get it, but when you paint people in corners like that, which will analyze Mr. Garner's alleged chokehold at the time, and you'll see, and I'll bring out some different angles of what we're viewing there, especially from a forensic standpoint.
One more element, and then we're really going to go right to the tape. And by the way, it is a Daily News exclusive, and we're using it, acknowledging that it is their piece of video. Professor Wilson, there's no mistaking that all three of the people involved in this were male men of color. There's a perception, I don't think I'm stepping out, there's a perception that right now and in the past, that's the way people feel that this is a factor in this. Do you see that the ethnicity of the gentleman involved is a factor? Because in one of them, there was a black cop who allegedly did the kicking.
I think inevitably we have to raise the issue of race when it comes to police-community relations. Especially in this city. I mean, we've had some serious incidents from the 1970s. One of the things that we have to be wrestling with is that as we deal with zero tolerance and as we deal with a new concept of policing, which has been somewhat effective in reducing the crime rate, we want to make certain that a police officer is not dealing with citizens in a contemptuous way. I mean, we saw that the abuses, that was a result of stop and frisk, when you're stopping people, and the vast majority of them have no contrabands and are, in fact, innocent. So one of the things that I think the de Blasio administration is now trying to rebalance in terms of police-community relations is to make certain that we can have effective policing, but humane policing. And I think one of the things that the Eric Garner situation personifies is really how policing should not be done. It's a classical example of the abuse of power.
Let's go right to let's go to the videotape, and I know this is the tape, again, courtesy of the Daily News. This is the tape of the entire incident with Eric Garner, so let's put that up on the screen. Can you do that? Here we go. So now, hold on. Don't touch me. Came over. Don't touch me. Got into it a little too soon. I'd love to back it up a little bit and take a moment to watch them. Could we do that? Back up and talk to and get to it a little earlier in the tape? We kind of, whoops, there we go. When you come, so here's what happened with this Eric Garner situation, is they came up to him. He was suspected of selling loose cigarettes, untaxed, and certainly not legal to do that. The officers were talking to them, and he said, hey, get away from me. You guys are always harassing me. What should a police officer be doing in that situation?
Well, at that point, Gary, when you look at the video, we see it in a spot where just right before the confrontation takes place, we need to also look what happens before that. Apparently, the police are going to make an arrest. All right? And a word to the audience, whether people want to hear this or not. If the police are making a move at you and just say, look, we're placing you under arrest, When you back off, don't touch me, and resist, you're just escalating the situation. All right? The best thing to do is comply, because unfortunately, you could see how this thing unravels, and needless to say, in many ways, it just doesn't look good.
So here's the
unfortunate
question, is
result.
you can see it there. He's just proclaiming his innocence. Dr. Wilson talked about, in essence, the broken window theory. So now you've got a guy, should the police, you're saying they're going to make an arrest, should they have made that judgment already? Or should they have just said, you know what, this does not warrant making an arrest? And I think the mayor even said, you know what, if he's not causing a community concern, maybe you just tell him to move on.
But I think there's a larger question. I mean, Garner is saying that there's a history of persecution out there.
He said you're always harassing me.
And here's a fellow acting as a citizen. Just prior to this, he broke up a fight.
Right.
He's well known in the neighborhood. I mean, there's no question that selling untaxed cigarettes is a misdemeanor, and it is a crime. But at the time, there is no evidence that he was selling any tobacco at the time, and he's very clear that he is innocent. So it seems to me that if the police officer had any kind of verbal skills, that situation could have been settled without escalating.
Professor Aloya, so what's your perspective on what you have seen here on this
Well,
video?
just to get back to your quality of life issue, Gary, that you had addressed, you know, even as a former narcotics sergeant, you know, other cops may see somebody rolling a marijuana joint and say, look, get rid of it or whatever. But, you know, in the narcotics unit, that's one of our jobs. You know, this country for years has been screaming for quality of life. You know, I don't know what neighborhood everybody here lives in.
So here's the question. Here's the question. I understand what you're saying. Do they need to arrest him in order to improve the quality of life? Or if they say to him, you know what, don't do this, next time we'll arrest you, we've talked to you before, you know what I mean?
Right.
And deal with that. And in fact, the mayor did say something to that effect, that, you know what, if he's not really causing a disturbance in the community, why go through all of this?
Now, that could go either way, but let's get a little more history on this. According to the accounts in the papers, he's got 30 priors. I don't know exactly what they're locked off. So if he's a predicate offender with this type of offense, maybe an arrest is in order. Supposedly on his possession, he had 1 pack of regular tax cigarettes and 1 pack of untaxed cigarettes.
Right.
Just by possession of that alone could lead to whatever the allegation was, that he was selling so-called loosies or loose individual cigarettes that happen to be untaxed. That's illegal to sell cigarettes in that manner, by the way. An arrest may have been warranted under these circumstances. I don't know if these are regular patrol cops or were they working for a vice enforcement unit or a quality of life unit.
Then the next question is what we saw in the video, that one of the officers put he's a big man, there's no question about that. What's the proper way to physically restrain, and if you've made the decision that you're going to arrest this guy, what's the way to do that? Well,
the idea is to subdue somebody, immobilize them, get them down, hands behind the back, cuff them. Now, in what I have in front of me, it's real quick. Members of the NYPD department will not use chokeholds. A chokehold shall include, but not be limited to, which leaves something wide open for interpretation, any pressure to the throat or windpipe, which may prevent or hinder breathing or reduce the intake. Now, the way that officer initially grabbed the guy, it looked like a headlock. Whether or not it was an actual chokehold is open for interpretation.
Although once he said, I can't breathe, at that point, shouldn't somebody have said, well, you know what, maybe we got to be real careful?
It's something to take into consideration, but let me just put another spin on this. We know he wasn't the picture of perfect health. He did suffer from either an asthma or a diabetic type condition. Now, if he was not in good shape, 350 pounds, I understand that large guy, I would venture a guess that even if the cops just wrestled with him without putting any type of hold around his neck, he may have succumbed to those same things. Directly, I think the ME's office is not going to say he was directly died from a chokehold.
I was about to say, I know Dr. Wilson has something responding to what you heard.
He said over 8 times, I cannot breathe. Part of being a police officer is to protect life, not just to make arrests. One of the things that we value in the society is that we treat life as being sacrosanct. So if you have a fellow and he's saying to you constantly repeatedly, I cannot breathe, it means that you have you have utter contempt for his life.
Mm-hmm. And is there another way to continue that restraint, saying, okay, we now have heard you can't breathe, you loosen up on his neck specifically, but still continue to restrain him? One would think logically you could do that.
You can, but just getting back from him with the choke itself, if your windpipe is being severely restricted to the extent that you have difficulty breathing, he was rather clear in him saying, I can't breathe. That does not necessarily mean it was from the chokehold, because if I was to put 2 fingers on your throat and pinch, you wouldn't be speaking too clearly, I can't breathe. I'm venturing a guess this actually triggered something like an asthma attack. But the reason why I'm saying this was
but is that relevant? Is that relevant? I mean, certainly the police officer doesn't know the medical condition of anybody.
It's relevant to the extent where virtually every person in the media is saying this guy died from a direct chokehold, which, number one, we don't know at the minute, and number two, preliminary, that what I've seen in the paper is that he probably suffered something from a coronary or an asthma attack.
But that's that's an assumption, right? We don't know that scientifically. What we do know is that he had enough energy to protest the constant persecution of him. We do know that while he was being taken down, he was constantly saying, I cannot breathe.
So you know, we can go back and forth about this. The bottom line here for you is that the police officer should have some dynamic about it. Is there emotion that plays for the police officer that says, you know what, this is a very difficult job, much like you lift a big rock or something and you got to get your energies. Well, I've got to take this guy down. He's a big man. I don't want to hear any objection because I got a job to do.
It does, Gary. And like I said before, when you look at these things, it never really looks good for the cops in many ways, especially a death in police custody. So where do we go from here? Should the cops have pepper sprayed the guy, use a nightstick? I don't know.
Well, would that have been appropriate?
Under those circumstances, his resisting him being that big of a guy. Remember, if you look at his motions,
so
he's resisting arrest.
Your answer is potentially.
If we weren't grabbing him or whatever, pepper spray. Now, the only problem with that is there's too many cops on the guy and in the area. You don't want to pepper spray.
And if you pepper spray a guy with asthma, you got to potentially the same.
It may.
Let's go to the telephone. It's Mark from Pelham Parkway. Everybody on the phone's got to be quick. We got a lot of people to talk to. So, Mark, go ahead.
Hey, Gary. I'm bringing down the volume on this. I got a statement. This gentleman who is a professor should not be teaching any form of law at school because what he's doing is he's giving the Jim Jones Guyana Kool-Aid system. First of all, let me bring something out here. The law clearly states if you contribute negligently or non-negligently to anything, whether a person has a condition or not, they should be guilty of at least, at the best case scenario, of involuntary manslaughter. They stood around there watching this guy, not breathing. You see an officer come over, hey, buddy, it's not so bad. And at that point, he was out cold. The sergeant came over, a female sergeant came over, and did absolutely nothing and did not control the situation.
Listen, Mark, we did not get into after this. We only showed the beginning of it.
Right,
and the EMTs that were involved.
What the professor's saying there is that it doesn't make a difference if it's a chokehold or a headlock. If you put somebody in a headlock, true, he may have had a condition, but the point is that it becomes a contributory negligence. First of all, why is it police officers, I'll go back to Amadou Diallo, they said he had a gun. 41 shots were shot, and they didn't even know it was their own shots ricocheting him. Now, one of them got convicted. The problem I'm having with all of this is for 35,000 cops on the street, 3,900 do a great job. But I will remind the sergeant of something. The department had Harvey Schlossberg, who was a detective at one point and became the department psychologist, and he coined a statement for officers like this, and it was called Wyatt Earp syndrome.
Mark, I want to give Professor Alloy a chance to respond, so we appreciate your comments.
Should I hold on?
No.
Or am I going to be cut off?
You'll be cut off.
Well,
so you're
glad to see that my quality as a professor has been impugned by. But look, would I have done certain things different? It's great Monday morning quarterbacking. First of all, as a sergeant on the scene, I would have been a little more proactive. Look, let's get this guy cuffed or whatever.
And then
difficulty breathing, I would have sat the guy up. Now, this thing says put him in a position that doesn't impede his breathing. And that means generally not on his back or his stomach, especially if somebody's over. I would have sat the guy up, definitely get him cuffed. Now, somebody who's complaining about difficulty breathing, you got to watch. If you've dealt with people on the street, people do fake injuries and illnesses. That's their 1/2 second to make a move and get away or do something bad.
Dr. Wilson, there's been talk, and I know it's in Florida and in other places, about having cameras on the lapels of police officers. Does that help or hurt? Because then everybody plays to the camera.
Well, I think one of the things that has helped, I mean, the technology that we have today. I mean, the fellow Ramsey Orta, who made the video with the iPhone, if he had not made that video, we'd be speculating much more so.
Much like we did with Eleanor Bumpers,
Precisely,
for example.
right. But we see the reality of what was taking place.
Right.
And I think one of the things that is going to take place in future years, that this is something that will be shown in an academy as how not to make an arrest.
Let's go to the telephone. Adam from Pelham Gardens. Adam, how are you?
Hi, how's it going, Gary?
Doing well.
So I wanted to just say something to Professor Aloya. Before it was said, Eric Gardner said over and over that he could not breathe. And I think the quote that you said was that should be taken under consideration. Can't you see how expressing it in that kind of way, there's a certain lack of empathy, and can't you see how, when folks are looking at the NYPD, there's a certain, this is a human being. I'll leave it at that.
I understand. All right, thank you very much. I mean, but what Professor Aloya did say was that if he had been on the scene, and all things being equal, based on what he saw, that he would have listened to what the gentleman said and sat him up and dealt with that, potentially. Some form of negligence of those officers who were on the scene. We do have Councilman Andy King, who I know has strong feelings about this entire issue. We probably could do a full show with Councilman King on this. But just your comments, sir, and what do you think the City Council ought to do in light of what we've seen here?
Well, thank you again, Gary, for bringing this issue to light tonight. I would just say this. It comes a point that as much as I respect the men and women in blue who do a marvelous job in protecting the city of New York, it comes a point that we have to recognize if they violate the law and their own rules and regulations, that we must hold them accountable. And holding them accountable doesn't mean taking your badge and your gun and sitting you in the air condition while EMTs have been stripped of their salaries for negligence on the scene themselves. Their own regulations state if you're doing service and if another person of service, which is the police officer, is overly aggressive in handling a potential suspect, then you will be just as liable for any damages that happen if you do not intervene. So as much as I appreciate both of your guests here tonight, I am a little disappointed when I hear that, the kind of the nonchalant and trying to explain what we've seen on the on the videotape.
Councilman,
I always ask this question because excuse me, Gary, I'm sorry.
Sure, it's all right.
I always ask this question: if this color of the gentleman who was killed, if he was a different color, would we be having these same conversations?
Let me ask.
You don't ever hear of black officers killing a white man or a white woman over a period of time. But we
understand.
Every couple of years or decades, we're having the same conversation.
I understand you saying that, but the police officer who allegedly kicked the man down, I think it was in Bed-Stuy, over the marijuana arrest, was an African-American police officer. Now, I'm not discounting the notion of race. In fact, we talked about it earlier, but let's be clear that did happen, and thank goodness nothing more serious didn't happen to that guy, but we could have had that problem. Professor Aloya, just your thoughts about what the councilman said?
Well, there's much of what I do agree with the council member. I think, and what Dr. Wilson said, I think it's going to come a point in time, it's going to be a reality, whether cops like it or not, that with all the video and everything else going on, we're probably going to have to be wired for video. I think it serves a twofold purpose. It should keep cops in order, say, wait a minute, we got to do this by the book, and what have you. But at the same time, it should also protect us. You have car stops where people make these outlandish allegations. Now we'll hold it against them.
I saw a news report.
Look at it from that point.
I saw a news report in Florida where they showed an arrest, and the alleged perpetrator was saying, I'm being heard, and actually it was nothing of the kind. So in that way, it would protect the police officer. Councilman, you're talking about clearly more enforcement. Is there legislation out there that you'd like to see that could be helpful in this and other incidents?
Well, it's not even adding new legislation. We're just asking, and in a press conference that we held on the steps of City Hall, We asked the mayor to step in with his leadership and make sure that he instructs that there's a swift investigation. You know, the videos don't lie. We don't want to be convinced that we didn't see what we saw. And we're saying, listen, Commissioner Bratton, you've come in, you've done a good job of trying to have a new paradigm shift of how communities and police react to one another. Then you know what? You have to hold your officers accountable to your own rules that are on the book so we can build that trust. I haven't, even the president of the police benevolent Lynch, I've yet in my young years ever hear when a police officer's done wrong that he's ever admit that a police officer's done wrong. Police officers can't ever do any wrong, and we know as humans we do wrong. And as an ex-union member, we have members. If you do wrong, you still got to hold people accountable.
Councilman, thank you so much. We'll get you on here and we'll talk more about this and other issues. We appreciate it. Professor Aloya, training the biggest issue here in terms of preventing this for the future?
Well, Commissioner Bratton from top down wants reevaluation of the procedure, reinforce the procedures regarding a chokehold. You know, what is that going to amount to? Do not grab anybody above the neckline.
Well, but aren't there tactics that could be used outside of a chokehold?
Well, other smaller police departments, even in Westchester County, the regular patrol officers have tasers. Now, I know it's going to be a cost factor. Would that have prevented this? Could be. But could that be in the offering in the future?
Before we run out of time, you had some interesting ideas about education and other things.
Yeah, I think that when Ben Ward was the commissioner of police,
we only have about a minute.
Yeah, he introduced the present requirements. I think that the requirements should be increased. I think to become a police officer, you should at least have a baccalaureate degree. I think to be in a leadership position, you should at least have a master's degree. One of the things that we do know, that police officers who are educated tend to exercise much better discretion than police officers who are poorly educated.
Certainly, which reinforces what both of you do at Monroe College to say that you'd like to get a greater education.
Let me just say one other thing. Mm-hmm. Some police departments have already adopted tracking systems. You can easily begin to evaluate a police officer. And if there's a pattern of abuse, then that police officer either needs to be retrained or, in fact, to resign
and
from the
force. And New York One reported that the background of the police officer involved in the Eric Garner incident did have a track record.
There is, in fact, a civil rights case already against that.
This is a vital topic. Professor Augie Aloya from Monroe College, thank you.
Thanks for having me,
Dr. Basil Wilson, we appreciate your presence here as well and your expertise. And folks, this dialogue is going to have to continue. You can certainly send us an email if you want to comment on anything you saw or heard on tonight's show, and we will get to it and try and read some of those comments on a future program. You can also become a Facebook fan, and you can see our archives at bronxnet.org. You look at the Bronxtalk link on the bottom right navigation bar. Thanks to Jane, thanks to Neilani, who's our director tonight, and thank you. We'll see you next week. Good night.
Very good program, sir.